Live from Ann Arbor, Michigan, this is Veterans Radio. And now, here's your host, Dale Throneberry.
And beginning this portion of our Veterans Radio program, Ken's going to give us a little bit of news. What's going on in the world of military affairs?
Well, the Department of Veterans Affairs recently dedicated a ceremony to officially open the Sacramento Valley VA National Cemetery in Dixon, California. Nearly 346,000 veterans and their families live within the service radius of the National Cemetery, and burials began in October of 2006 on approximately 14 acres, which includes a committal shelter and 3 burial sections. And you can get more information on VA burial benefits by going to the VA cemetery to cem.va.gov. That's the Veterans Affairs webpage. And an airman assigned to the 50th Mission Support Squadron recently fell victim to a new banking scam. The scammers apparently generate random routing and account numbers into which they try to deposit 1 cent. Once the 1 cent deposit clears, the perpetrators know the account is active and begin to withdraw funds from the account. The withdrawals seem to take place near the beginning of the month, and some people have only seen a single withdrawal from their accounts. So, word to the wise, check your accounts frequently.
It sounds like PayPal.
It's similar,
exactly.
Yeah.
That's the way that they test your account.
Well, but PayPal is a little more secure. These guys are just, getting into a bank and randomly running numbers and seeing what happens. That's dangerous. So keep word to the wise. Know what's going on with your account. Researchers in the United States are trying to develop a controversial new treatment that could potentially help by reducing the intensity of a particular traumatic memory in veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. They stress they are not trying to wipe out the memory itself, but rather to alter the patient's response to it. Evidently, what they do is they give them the drug that eases the reaction, and that's their goal, is just try to relieve the anxieties and stresses.
It's an interesting story that I was talking to my undercover agent who works with the Michigan National Guard, and supposedly when the troops come back from overseas, they're being debriefed, and you go through what the treatments are, what your issues are, and so on and so forth. Well, one of the problems is that those debriefings are taking up to a year and a half to sit down and talk with some of these veterans and find out what their issues are. Mm-hmm. And that's resulting, obviously, in some problems. Another issue that's going on with the Veterans Affairs Office right now is that some of the people at the higher up levels of the VA got really nice bonuses.
Oh, really?
Yes, for their work over the last year.
Oh, that's nice.
And that's something that we're going to be talking about in a couple of weeks.
Uh-huh.
We all know that the Veterans Administration, at least most of the local VA hospitals, do the best that they can with the funds that they have, and something I think that we need to address later on. This is coming down from a number of sources that were sending me emails over the week. A little bit, people were a little bit upset with that.
I would be upset with that too. Yes.
Yeah, for such a good job.
And one final news item, and a very sad one. The United States has lost one of its heroes Thursday. Wally Schirra, one of the 7 original astronauts, died of a heart attack in Scripps Green Hospital near San Diego. He was a Naval Academy graduate, shot down an enemy jet in Korea, and went on to set several space records. He was the only astronaut to fly in the first 3 space programs, the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. In 1965, he performed the first rendezvous in space, maneuvering his Gemini 6 to within 10 feet of Gemini 7. Wally Schirra was 84 years old.
I still idolize those guys.
Oh, yeah.
And I think most of us of our generation just think they were so amazing and heroic in what they did, and how anybody had the nerve to go up in space like that. Remember, they used to isolate them when they'd come back because they didn't know what they'd been exposed to and so forth.
I still want to go.
Well, all you need is what?
$10 million or something?
Is that all? $10 million?
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah,
well,
right.
Let us know.
I might have to cash a paycheck.
Okay. Yeah. Quit hoarding all your money.
And it's time for Welcome Home. And each week, Veterans Radio, we welcome home servicemen and women who have been stationed around the world in the service of our country. Sal's Restaurant provided a welcome home meal for over 100 Marines from the 3rd Battalion, 14th Marine Regiment on Wednesday, the 1st of May, at West Trenton's Reserve Center in Pennsylvania. Soldiers from the Boone-based 1451st Transportation Company of the North Carolina National Guard returned home on Monday, April 30th. And Marine Corporal Brad Walker from the Delta Company of the 4th Combat Engineer Battalion received a very special welcome home celebration from friends and family as he walked through his home's front door on his new pair of legs. Hudson County held a very special ceremony to welcome Vietnam veterans on April 12th at the Brennan Courthouse in Jersey City, New Jersey. Welcome home.
I think that's an incredible thing that was going on there in Hudson County, is that they gave out medals to the Vietnam veterans. And the other issue that I wanted to talk about real briefly is that, as far as welcoming home is concerned, is that they've added 3 more veterans' names to the Vietnam Memorial. And Army Sergeant Richard Pruitt, who died as a result of complications from wounds that he received in the war 30 years ago. Joseph Gerald Krywicki of Holton, Michigan, and Army Specialist Weston Alvin Stuyvesant of Monticello, Illinois, have been added to the Vietnam War wall. And on behalf of Veterans Radio, I want to tell all of them to welcome them all home, and welcome home to all the veterans coming home from Iraq and around the world.
And while you're talking about the wall, the 25th anniversary of the wall will be coming up this November 11th in Washington.
Okay.
So if you're interested in going and seeing the wall and in helping to observe its anniversary, you can do that.
Okay. And we'll be right back. You're listening to Veterans Radio. And we are back here on Veterans Radio, coming to you from the studios of Ave Maria Radio in Ann Arbor. The program of today is going to be talking about a case against some Marines and I want to kind of set the stage a little bit for you if I can. On November 19th, 2005, members of Kilo Company of the Marine Corps were on deployment near and about the town of Haditha in Iraq. And one of their Humvees was blown up. As a result of that, and different variations of what we've been able to find out so far, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, is that in addition to the Humvee being blown up and one of the Marines being killed, 2 were seriously wounded, that there was a coordinated ambush going on with this at the time, and that the Marines fought back, and over the period of time, a number of Iraqi insurgents were killed, and unfortunately a number of Iraqi civilians were killed also. After this, a number of different types of investigations have been going on. Time magazine's had some, Newsmax, lots of different stories are out there. They said it was a massacre. They said it wasn't a massacre. They said that the commanders up the line didn't know what was going on, didn't follow what was happening. Once they did do their investigation, they supposedly tried to cover it up. And it's just been kind of rolling as it's been going on over the last couple of years. As I say, different news sources have had different stories, and from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum. Our guest today is Dick Thompson, who is the Chief Counsel of the Thomas More Law Center here in Ann Arbor, and the Thomas More Law Center, has taken on the case for Lieutenant Colonel Chessani. And Lieutenant Colonel Chessani is about to go before a Article 32 board, I believe it is, by the end of the month. And so anyway, you've taken on this case, and Dick, I want to welcome you to Veterans Radio.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And maybe you can kind of fill us in a little bit more on the background of this case.
Sure. As you indicated, the incident occurred on November 19, 2005. At about 7:15 a.m., this Marine convoy was going through Haditha. Now, you have to understand, Haditha is an insurgent stronghold.
This is in
Ann Arbor province. Right. Suddenly, an IED, roadside bomb went off underneath one of the Humvees. It killed one of the Marines, injured 2 others, and simultaneously, as soon as that explosion occurred, the Marine convoy started to get fire from nearby civilian homes. And the Marines did what they were trained to do. They got out of their vehicles, and a lieutenant shortly came up and told the Marine squad to take the houses. And a 4-man squad went into these 3 houses that they were getting fire from. And they went room to room and did what they were trained to do. That is, they threw a hand grenade in, and once the hand grenade exploded, they'd go in there and spray the room. Now, I have 3 sons, and they play video games. That's the way they take care of homes in these war games that they play. They did this in several rooms. They went to the next house, did the same thing. As a result of this house clearing operation, there were 24 Iraqis that were ultimately killed. 15 of them were civilians. Now, everyone understands in the combat zone in Iraq that the insurgents, the terrorists, make use of civilian populated areas as their cover, whether they're firing from mosques, schools, houses, and they realize that the Marines are going to defend themselves and return fire. And as soon as any civilian is killed, then they use that as a propaganda machine to give the Americans a black eye. As a result of this IED that exploded, it became a signal throughout Haditha for insurgent attacks. And several attacks were occurring throughout that area that Colonel Chessani had command of. He was the battalion commander of the battalion that was stationed in Haditha. In addition to about the 1,000 American troops he had an additional 1,000 Iraqi troops as well. So he was, as a commander, he was monitoring the situation and ordering his troops. Interestingly enough, let me jump forward. In December of this year, he was in December of 2006. They ultimately concluded a report, and he was charged with 2 offenses. One of the offenses was failure to investigate the incident that occurred on November 19th. And the second charge was failure to properly brief his upper echelon command as to what occurred. Now, those are the 2 charges against him. If he is convicted, he faces a possible 3 years in prison, dismissal from the Marines, and loss of all of his retirement. Now, he's a 19-year Marine veteran. He served in the Persian Gulf War. He served in Panama. He's had 3 tours in Iraq, and now his entire career is going to be wiped out, and the livelihood. He has 5 young children. I wanted to say that because I want to now go back to the scene. What was interesting is that immediately upon receiving the attack on November 19th, radio communications, as you know, would go back and forth. What they also had was an unmanned drone that was launched immediately by division to cover the scene. And so immediately, as this event was folding, the upper echelon knew what was going on. They were monitoring the radio traffic. They were seeing it with unmanned drones, what was going on. And the reports were going through the line. The next day, Colonel Chessani visited the scene, looked at it. All of his staff, his intelligence officer, the lieutenants on the scene, the company commanders on the scene, indicated what had occurred, and this was the civilian deaths were an unfortunate aspect of the Marines defending themselves. No problem. No investigation occurred at that time until Time magazine, several months later, gets some information from an Iraqi who we now know was an insurgent operative and says there was a massacre. Time magazine reporter, a guy by the name of McGurk, sends a communique to the Marine Command saying, I've got these questions. The Marine Command sends the questions down to Chessani. Chessani responds to the questions, and Time magazine leads off with the story, Haditha massacre. Okay. As soon as that story is led that way, the upper echelon, not the Marine Command, but the overall General Chiarelli, asks for an investigation. Okay.
I want to reintroduce, make sure people know what we're talking about here. And we're talking with Dick Thompson, who is the Chief Counsel for the Thomas More Law Center, who has taken on the case for Lieutenant Colonel Chessani. And what's going on is we're investigating the collateral damage or massacre at Haditha back in November of 2005. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, in one of the articles I was reading, is that there were people on the ground almost immediately after this conflict, which is what you do in the military. I mean, you always have to fill in after-action reports, and that they saw that there were civilians involved, and they immediately, did whatever they had to do to take care of them and the wounded and so forth. But that all of these reports were going up, and that it does turn out that this drone was taking videotapes of this entire incident, although that just came to light very recently.
Yes. In fact, it was within the last month. The two the lawyers that we have assigned to this case actually went down to Camp Pendleton and saw the video is still classified. Saw the classified video. There's a lot of strange things that's happening in this case. I mean, I don't like to have a conspiratorial theory out here, but basically I think this whole investigation has been politicized, and it's been done to harm the ability of not only the Marines but every combat officer and soldier fighting the war in Iraq. Because now what they have to do is every time they fire, they have to see, hey, am I going to be investigated for a crime? You might as well have a lawyer beside every combat soldier to tell him, okay, you can shoot, and this is what you can shoot at. I mean, I looked at the rules of engagement, and it is outrageous. If we had those rules of engagement in World War II, we would have lost World War II.
Right.
I mean, I was a I don't want to give away my age either. Age became a problem here. But I was at Fort Benning, Georgia for 2 years in a basic officer infantry course there. We didn't have anything about rules of engagement at that time. I mean, we were taught to fight and defeat the enemy. We didn't have to look at, can I fire here or can I fire there?
Well, the rules of engagement used to be if somebody shot at you, you shot back.
Right. But now we're all making our combat soldiers afraid to defend themselves, and that's why I say this case is a lot bigger than merely some Marines being charged and some officers' careers being ruined. It is going to impact the way our military can respond. And I think that we have to change the total environment of these rules of engagement, because if soldiers cannot react in combat the way they are trained to do, if they cannot fire upon the enemy when they're fired upon, then pretty soon we are not going to be able to defend ourselves and fight an effective campaign. That's what's happening here. In fact, Stars and Stripes had an article a few weeks ago where there are some Marines now patrolling the streets of Haditha wearing video cameras on their helmet that they've gotten themselves, so that if they fire back, they have some proof that they were firing in self-defense. That's how bad it's gotten.
We've talked to a number of Iraqi veterans who have complained about that same problem, and that that they have to think about it. And the problem is that when you get yourself into a combat situation, if you hesitate, you're dead.
Correct. And that's the problem.
And that's the issue. I did want to just kind of go back quickly, and you mentioned the two lawyers from the Thomas More Law Center that are covering the case. Those are both Iraqi veterans themselves, aren't they?
One is, yes. Both of them, first of all, both of them are former Marine officers. Rob Muse was a Marine infantry officer, and then during his stay in a stint in the Marines actually sent him to law school. And then once he got out, he became a JAG officer. And he was a veteran of the First Persian Gulf War. Brian Rooney is a JAG officer. He served 7 months in Iraq. He was there just last year, and so he's very familiar with. He was involved with the Fallujah campaign. He's very familiar with the rules of engagement and what they tell their Marines, which is totally different now than what is coming down from headquarters. In fact, headquarters, as a result of the Haditha case, have changed their rules of engagement, making it even worse. Before, if you received hostile fire, you could fire back. Now you have to positively identify the person before you fire back. And a lot of times that's not, you can't do that. The fire is coming from the house. You don't know who else is in the house beside the person firing at you. Does that mean you can't fire back? So it is a ludicrous implications here of what is happening, not only to the officers. And let me tell you, the officers that are being charged, I've looked at their evaluation reports. They were all scheduled for higher command positions. Outstanding evaluation reports. The 4 Marines that were charged, I mean, their lives are ruined. Their families don't have money. Their families are trying to get funds to hire these lawyers. Now, the Thomas More Law Center is a public interest law firm, and so we can give our services to Chessani without charge. But this is destroying the lives of Marines who thought they were doing the right thing. It is clear that once this investigation started, these are Marine officers, the Marine personnel. The Army conducted the investigation. An Army colonel cleared the Marines. That wasn't good enough. So they brought in a general, an Army general, who then conducted an investigation. And it was based upon the investigation of the Army general that these charges were levied. But let me tell you, and the Army general's report is yet classified. But I'm going to talk about it in this sense because someone's leaked the general's report to the Washington Post. And if you read carefully what the Washington Post says, the report said, not what their characterization, but what the report says, it says, number one, there was no intentional killing of any civilians. That's what it found. Secondly, the Colonel Chessani and the officers repeated everything that happened and up the chain of command. So the report itself would have cleared Chessani and these Marines. But that's still classified. Nevertheless, these Marines were charged. I think they were charged for political reasons. Before the report was even completed, before the charges were even levied, you had Congressman John Murtha from Pennsylvania in May come out publicly and accuse the Marines of cold-blooded murder and the officers of covering it up. This is a congressman.
A former Marine general.
A former Marine. Well, he's a colonel. He was a former colonel. I'd like to see his record. But anyway, he accused these officers of covering it up and the Marine combat troops of cold-blooded murder. What that means, in one sense, and Lieutenant General McInerney from the Air Force and Air Force Chief of Staff opined that when Murtha said that tainted the entire criminal prosecution because there is undue command influence. Because Murtha said he got it from a high-ranking Marine general. So right away, everyone in the chain of command knows, hey, the general thinks these guys are, or thinks the general thinks these guys are guilty of cold-blooded murder, so I better watch what I do in the court-martial. Yeah. So this thing stinks to high heaven.
Well, we're gonna go into more detail about that in a little bit. We're coming up on a break at the bottom of the hour, and we're talking with Dick Thompson of the Thomas More Law Center, and we're investigating the supposed shootings and massacres in Haditha in Iraq in November of 2005. We'll be right back. You're listening to Veterans Radio.
The Medal of Honor is the highest award for valor in combat given a member of the Armed Forces of the United States. There have been over 3,400 recipients of the nation's highest award. This is one of them.
Staff Sergeant Homer Wise's platoon was pinned down 4 times. Each time, Wise led a breakout of the platoon. While his platoon was pinned down by enemy small arms fire from both flanks, he left his position of comparative safety and assisted in carrying one of his men, who had been seriously wounded and who lay in an exposed position, to a point where he could receive medical attention. The advance of the platoon was resumed, but it was again stopped by enemy frontal fire. A German officer and 2 enlisted men, armed with automatic weapons, threatened the right flank. Fearlessly exposing himself, Wise moved to a position from which he killed all 3 with his submachine gun. Returning to his squad, he obtained an M1 rifle and several anti-tank grenades, then took up a position from which he delivered accurate fire on the enemy holding up the advance. As the battalion moved forward, it was again stopped by enemy frontal and flanking fire. Wise procured an automatic rifle and, advancing ahead of his men, neutralized an enemy machine gun with his fire. When the flanking fire became more intense, he ran to a nearby tank and, exposing himself on the turret, restored a jammed machine gun to operating efficiency and used it so effectively that the enemy fire from an adjacent ridge was materially reduced, thus permitting the battalion to occupy its objective.
The Medal of Honor series is a production of Veterans Radio.
And we're back on Veterans Radio, and we're talking with Dick Thompson, the Chief Counsel for the Thomas More Law Center. And Ken, you had a question for him.
Yes, sir. It sounds to me like these charges are really false. If you consider that they'd had the drone and reporting up the chain of command and everything, how did these charges actually come about then?
Well, that's very interesting. That's why I think this is all a political scapegoating going on of the Marine officers and the troops that were there, because Time Magazine had this article that said, there was this Haditha massacre. Then a congressman who was a chair of the subcommittee on military appropriations accuses the Marines and officers of crimes. And so all at once there was marching orders to the NCIS, you better find something wrong. They had to substantiate what this congressman was saying. And to support what you said, all the way up to a 2-star general in the Marine Corps had the information and thought there was no need for investigation, that there were no crimes committed. Yet, when the words start coming out of the media and also from Congressman John Murtha, I think that became the rule for the NCIS, that they had to go out and find something wrong. And this investigation lasted over a year. There were over 60 NCIS agents used in the investigation. Thousands and thousands of pages of classified investigation material were compiled as a result of it, and our lawyers, Rob Muse and Brian Rooney, are going through those thousands of pages of classified information, and we just found that they just found some more classified information. So they're just kind of leaking this stuff out to us, and the more they give us, the more clear it is that there was no crime, that this is a made-up crime. I am so outraged by what is happening here. I think most patriotic Americans, most veterans would be, maybe the veterans might not be stunned. They may have had some kind of experience with this before, but most Americans would be shocked to see what the military is doing to its own.
But what about the Marines that were involved in it, and not the colonel, but his troops on the ground? Mm-hmm. What was the result of their cases?
Their cases have not yet been tried. One of the 4 Marines charged, the 4 combat Marines that took these houses, were charged with murder, unpremeditated murder. As a result of the investigation going on, and quite frankly, as a result of our lawyer, Rob Muse, going down to Camp Pendleton and taking some sworn videotaped testimony, because several of these Marines are going back to Iraq, the Marine prosecutor realized how bad his case was turning out to be and just granted one of the 4 Marines charged with immunity so that they can try to make a case. But even the lawyers that are representing the other remaining 3 think that that's not going to help the government's case at all, because this Marine has given statements before that exonerated all of them.
Mm-hmm. It just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. There's something, as they say, there's something rotten in Denmark, and hopefully we'll find out.
I'm looking at an article about this. They dropped the case against the Sergeant Dela Cruz just last week, it looks like. And it's going, although the prosecutors say they needed more time to prepare their cases, there is much more to the story than has been learned. And it paints a shocking picture of a prosecution that should never have been pursued. Can you tell us a little bit about, I know that why Thomas More got involved in this was because that the NCIS was getting, I don't know, it's almost like they were getting rough with their witnesses and trying to get get them to answer their questions. And could you tell us a little bit about what might have occurred with that?
Right. We started to find this out as our lawyers were interrogating witnesses in preparation for the Article 32 hearing, and then we took the videotape testimony. we were shocked as to what NCIS was doing. Now, I was also a former prosecuting attorney for Oakland County,
Right.
so I pretty much know how you're supposed to investigate, how you're supposed to examine witnesses and even suspects. What we found out that these Marine officers and enlisted men were being interrogated up to 18 hours at a time. When they were asking for food and water, they weren't being given that. Marine officers were yelled at, papers were thrown at them, agents segregated them into dark dungeon-like rooms. Mind you, a lot of this was happening in Haditha while there was a combat going on. And so the officers realized that these NCIS agents weren't really looking to find out what happened. They had an agenda. And when the officers started giving them information that would tend to exonerate what these other Marines had done in Haditha, the NCI agents weren't interested in it. They brushed it off and they said, well, we want to get back to this subject matter.
So in other words, they already had a plan of what they wanted.
Exactly. So what we did, Dale, is just 2 weeks ago, we sent a letter to the Secretary of Navy, Donald Winters, and we asked that he conduct an independent investigation into the methods and techniques used by the NCIS agents, because even while this was occurring, a Marine commander went to the senior NCI agent in Haditha and complained as to how officers and men were being treated by these NCIS agents in the interrogation process, and they brushed them aside. So we've asked the Navy Secretary to conduct an independent investigation into this. Now, they haven't contacted our office specifically, but they released a public statement that they were going to conduct an investigation.
I don't know. It just seems it's scary when we start doing this. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be investigating, wanton premeditated murders or even accidental murders. We need to investigate them so that they don't happen on a regular basis. But it just seems like for whatever reason that I don't want to say the administration, but the Pentagon in this case is going overboard to get these guys. And
Yes.
This is not the first case of this.
Right.
It seems like a lot of times there's overreaction, and I know that the news gets out and it's it goes crazy on one end of the the media, and they say the mass media is doing this and so forth. But when you've got congressmen who are coming out with their own agenda, and I mean Murtha is head of the House, I think it's the House Military
Appropriations
Committee.
Right.
So I mean they got to play the political game in here. So now you've got people that are higher up who have their careers, their generals and so forth. They got to cover their backsides, and it's almost like everybody's on their own instead of the teamwork that should be there.
So what you have here is you have a insurgent propaganda operative fulfilling his mission. The Marines and the military are doing the job for him. They are destroying the combat effectiveness of Marines and soldiers in Haditha and other places in Iraq by making them so afraid to fire their weapons because they may be charged later on down the road. I mean, a year later, they may be charged and facing prison time. So they have effectively curtailed the combat effectiveness of our troops. And I just think that this is sabotaging the war effort. And I don't know who's behind it, but it's clear based upon all of the investigation that we have, based upon, as you said, Dale, now all at once they're granting immunity, realizing they don't have a case. But yet the word is out there on the street, be careful before you fire your weapon. And as you know, he who hesitates is lost. If you can't,
he who hesitates is dead.
Right, is dead. Quite clearly.
One of the problems, among many other ones out there, is that our troops are over there acting as policemen, and they're not trained to be policemen. And even though we've been doing it for 4 years now, we're still not. There is no way that you can react to this. I mean, we have police on the streets of major cities in our own country that if they're shot at, they can't return fire. So it ends up with the thing is these guys now are wearing dash cameras on their heads.
Right. Well, first of all, the Marines are trained that you have to look at every civilian with a degree of suspicion.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they're strapping bombs to young kids. Women are strapping bombs to themselves. And so, on the one hand, they're trained to be wary of everybody because, as you say, they're now policemen. They're not combat soldiers. They're walking and patrolling the streets. There was one incident that occurred just before then, and I'm not sure it was in the Haditha province or not, where this Marine went into a hospital without taking the appropriate precautions, this Marine squad, and went into this place where there were a bunch of beds. Men were lying in the beds, and these men were insurgents, and they jumped up and fired, their automatic weapons, killed 8 Marines. Time after time after time, you see what seems to be an innocent situation developing into an attack on Marines where our soldiers are being killed. And this kind of prosecution ties the hands, limits the ability of not only the soldiers on the ground, but even commanders. If you're going to spend all your time now doing investigations every time a civilian is killed, well, we're going to have a paper army that can't fight a war. They're just going to be doing investigations.
Absolutely. We're going to take another break right now. We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to Veterans Radio. And we're back on Veterans Radio, and we are talking with Dick Thompson, who is the Chief Counsel for the Thomas More Law Center, and we're talking about a case involving Lieutenant Colonel Chessani, who is being accused of covering up a conflict or supposed massacre that occurred in Haditha, Iraq, in November of 2005. Dick, where do we go from here? I mean, right now they're coming up on in essence, a grand jury investigation of Chessani, which is the Article 32. But their case is kind of crumbling around them. Where do you see it going?
Well, as you say, the Article 32 is the first stage. Now, that is scheduled to begin on May 30th in Camp Pendleton, California. We know it'll start then, but as I indicated earlier, because new information is being dropped on us, new classified information is being declassified so we can take a look at it. Although the Article 32 starts, it may go longer than the 2 weeks we planned for it to go. Once the Article 32 hearing is complete, the investigating officer then will make his recommendation to the general. And then the general has some time within which he can either accept the recommendation or reject the recommendation. For instance, if the investigating officer says, I don't find any crime here, the commanding general can still say, yes, I do, and schedule a courts-martial, which would then begin several months thereafter. So this process is going to go on for a long period of time. It's going to begin on May the 30th. Now, Colonel Chessani is the first officer, I believe, is the first officer who's going to have his Article 32 hearing begin. So May 30th, and as new investigative material comes in, we don't know. Maybe the prosecution will dump the case, but I doubt it.
Well, if the general can override the investigating officer's decision, why have the Article 32?
I'm not an expert on the military justice system, but that's the way the military is. Obviously, it's unique in the sense that dereliction of duty is one of the charges. That's where he failed to properly investigate. It's a military charge more than what we would see in the criminal justice system in the civilian world. So, it's a subjective thing in many respects. One of the things that I think is a defense that people will be surprised with, in the military system where there is a dereliction of duty charge, the outstanding military character of the defendant can finesse that charge. And we do know that Colonel Chessani had an outstanding military character and reputation. His evaluation reports were superb. In fact, the commanding general signed off on his evaluation reports. This is after the Haditha matter occurred. saying that this man is ready for higher command. He should be sent to a TLS top-level school, the Navy War College. It was clear that Colonel Chessani was on the path to a general's star until this prosecution occurred.
Assuming that he is found not guilty, what will that do to his military career? Just having this charge against him.
I asked our lawyers that because they're involved in JAG when they were in the military service, and one of the lawyers pointed to me. Remember the tailhook controversy?
Right.
One of the officers in the tailhook controversy became a general. So it doesn't necessarily, or an admiral, doesn't necessarily mean he can't reach that position, but it certainly is something he has to overcome.
Yeah, it's a mark against him.
It's a mark against him.
I would think so. Dick, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the Thomas More Law Center and how I know how you got involved in this case, but what else type of cases are you involved in?
We are a 501c3 corporation, and basically what we get involved in is religious freedom of Christians, time-honored family values, and the sanctity of human life. In more generic terms, we attempt to preserve America by defending its Christian heritage and moral values. We've gotten involved in cases like the Mount Soledad Cross. I don't know if you're familiar with that case. That was a 43-foot cross that was the centerpiece of a Veterans Memorial in San Diego, California, where the ACLU filed a lawsuit saying, take down the cross, it's a religious symbol. And the city was ready to do it after a 15-year battle, and the Thomas More Law Center came in and stopped it. We saved the cross.
There's a recent case that I was reading about in the news this morning about another case in California where they're asking a history teacher of 30 years or so to take down banners that he had in his room, like, all men are created equal and in God we trust.
In God we trust, yes. That was a case where this teacher, Brad Johnson, had been a school teacher for many, many years. He had these banners up for over 20 years. They said things like, in God we trust, God bless America. No one ever complained about it for all the 20 years he had it up until this year when the principal said take it down because it has a particular religious viewpoint. And after negotiations with the principal, they wouldn't budge, and so we filed a lawsuit on his behalf in the federal district court in California.
And where does that stand now?
Well, the lawsuit was just filed, so it's a long way.
If we don't pay attention, nobody will, I guess. It seems out there. I mean, it's just some of these things are so outrageous.
Well, Abraham Lincoln said, if we're going to be defeated, it's not going to be some foreign army from across the ocean. We're going to defeat ourselves. We're going to die by suicide. And it seems that kind of thing is happening in America more and more. And
Pogo said, I've seen the enemy, they is us.
Yes.
Well, we just all have to pay attention. And one of the advantages of living in this great country is that we do have such a diversity of opinion, and what we think is right and what we think is wrong. But at least we can say it, and nobody's going to come to your, and just you're not going to just disappear.
Right.
Like in so many other places. Well, for more information, how would people get a hold of Thomas More?
Well, they can visit our website. It's www.thomasmore.org. There's one O in more. And if they have any information, please feel free to contact us, either Rob Muse or Brian Rooney at area code 734-827-2001.
Okay, and we will get that. Put a link up on our website for people to get that from the Veterans Radio site.
And please keep us posted on the status of this case. We're very interested in this.
We'll do.
Appreciate it very much. Dick, thank you very much for being on Veterans Radio.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. We got another big show coming up next week,
yes,
don't
sir.
we, Ken?
Oh, yes, sir, we do. Yeah. It's one that I've been looking forward to for many months. Colonel Bud Day is the most decorated officer in the United States. He holds every combat medal from the Medal of Honor on down. And he spent 5.5 years in a POW camp. He was a cellmate of John McCain, and he went on to help the retirees retain their medical benefits, because the government wanted to cut off the medical benefits at the age 65 and saying, hey, just go on Medicare. And he fought the battle, and he lost the lawsuit, but he won the battle. because Congress passed the law giving a retired military Medicare for life, medical treatment for life. So I'm very excited to have him on. He's an amazing man. His biography is, when you read it, you say, how could this man have gone through all of this treatment in the POW camp? He was tortured daily for almost 5 years in the POW camp. His accomplishments are just absolutely amazing. Throughout the entire time he was in the POW camp, he was tortured, and he never once gave the North Vietnamese any useful information. It was always just his name, rank, and serial number. His mantra was to return with honor. We're also going to have a special guest. John McCain is going to be on to talk about Bud Day and how he met and what they went through in the camp. So I'm excited. I
can tell. He's jumping out of his seat here, folks.
Can you tell I'm excited?
He can't wait to do that. And I wanted to just point out something before I should have mentioned this when I was talking with Dick Thompson, is that one of the members of their board at the Thomas More Law Center is Rear Admiral Jeremiah Denton. Who was one of the longest held POWs. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking when you were talking about Bud Day, how these people came back from that situation and have gone on to live a very, very successful life. Obviously, some of them had, we're going to talk about PTSD. I would think that there would be some issues going on there with some of those guys. Mm-hmm. But
well, of course, Bud Day is got many physical disabilities because of the,
I know his
the
fingers
5 years
are all crunched up because they broke his fingers numerous times.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to talk about.
It's also interesting when a military person is taken as a POW, his rank never changes while he's a POW. It's when he comes home he finds out, hey, you got promoted 3 times while you were in camp. That's Admiral Denton was that way because he went in, I think, as a commander, and when he came out, he was a 2-star admiral. And all of their promotions are classified, top secret, until their return. And that's to prevent them from being mistreated because of their rank in the POW camps.
Well, it makes certain sense. So make sure that you tune in next week to Veterans Radio to hear that incredible story. Coming up the following week on the 19th, we're going to be looking at the Okinawa invasion of World War II, and we are looking for some survivors of the Okinawa invasion. So please, if you know of anybody who has been involved with that, give us a call at Veterans Radio. You can find all the information on our website. And then on Memorial Day, we want to tell some stories about your personal heroes that unfortunately did not make it home, because that's what Memorial Day is all about. So we want you to give us a call at Veterans Radio or send us an email, and we'll be more than happy to tell your stories on the air. I guess that's about it. Well, you got one thing you wanted to say. I understand that. Thank our guest, Bob. Good job on the board. All of our new interns, which you'll be meeting as we go along the way. On behalf of Veterans Radio and Ave Maria Radio, you are dismissed.